Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29.
Okay, so welcome everybody to today's committee meeting, the 4th of December. I'm going to just provide a brief overview of today's business. So the committee will receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on electric vehicle public charging infrastructure. We're going to consider written evidence from the Driver Vehicle Agency providing an in-year update on progress against its business plan for 2024-2025. We're going to consider written evidence on the Budget 24-25 final 24-25 Budget EQIA Consultation Report and consider the Department for Infrastructure Equality Action Plan. So we're just going to proceed through the agenda as follows. No apologies. So a declaration of interest to remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any member have any interest they wish to declare? I'm just declaring that we will be looking at the DVA's in-year update in terms of business plan, and I have family members that work in DVA. Okay, chairperson's business is item 3. At page 6, you'll see that there's an invitation from Belfast City Airport to visit and an offer of hosting a meeting. That invitation came to myself. So I'm just advising members that I'm not available on the dates that they have provided for me to meet, but that we'll consider arranging an informal visit later and at an appropriate time in the forward work programme. So are members content with that? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the draft minutes at page 8. You'll see draft minutes of proceedings of the meeting on the 27th of November 2024. Seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 27th of November 2024. And if so, I'll sign the minutes. Content? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, matters arising is item 5. At page 16, you'll see the clerk's memo update on strategic priorities, and advise member that the clerk's memo has been provided, setting out the key issues discussed in the course of last week's informal strategic planning meeting, and additional suggested actions are set out in bold in the memo. So I'm asking members if they wish to comment or propose any amendments to the issues contained in the memo. Is all content? Yes. And I just want to put on record thanks to the clerks for putting that all together, and thanks members for your participation in that last week. I think it's useful to have those going forward and setting out what we're going to do in the future in terms of the committee. So thank you to the clerks for getting that all together for us. So I'm seeking agreement just to proceed with the additional actions identified in the clerk's memo. Agreed? Yeah, thank you. At pages 3 and 4 of the table papers, you'll see responses from Northern Ireland Environment Agency and Northern Ireland Water regarding joint evidence sessions. More pertinent, I suppose, today more than ever, given yesterday's Spotlight programme, which was particularly damning in relation to the sewage overspills and the tonnage of sewage that is going into our waterways at the minute. So I'm just informing members that NIEA has advised that it would not be appropriate to appear with NI Water given its role as an environmental regulator for Northern Ireland Water. NIEA would, however, welcome the opportunity to provide written or oral evidence about matters within its responsibility if the issues raised are deemed appropriate for response by the Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. In noting the response from DERA, NI Water has suggested it appears after NIEA has given evidence in order to address any compliance or environmental matters raised by NIEA. Does any members want to make comment? Essentially what we would be doing now, obviously we wanted to have NI Water and NIEA in together, was our preferred option, but essentially now what we would be doing is we would have NIEA in and NI Water straight after.
On the same day, Chair?
Well, my preference would be the same day, yes. Because I think it's too important, and we need to scope out look at the Spotlight programme yesterday.
So who requested, did anyone request going after?
So NI Water have requested to go after NIEA.
Are we doing 2 closed sessions then?
No, it would be open session.
Open?
Yeah.
What's the Northern Ireland Water's reasoning for wanting to go after?
So NI.
Chair, can clarify, is it possible for us to do closed sessions?
Why would we do it in closed session?
No one asked the question, is it possible?
It would be possible, but the committee would need to be
We
very
still
clear in
couldn't
the
come
rationale
together.
for closed session.
No, and I don't mind that. It's not for anything. All I'm saying, the NIW is asked to come second, so they'll see the first session. That's why we asked for the two of them being together, to answer questions together. So that I'm only saying that whatever NIEA will have said will be read first, and then NIW will have an opportunity to comment on it.
Yeah.
Whereas the opposite way around is the same thing. NIEA won't, unless we are saying that what we want to ask of both is similar, you know.
Mark, I'm just going to bring you in there.
Sorry, Chair, I missed the start of what you were saying, but where NIA says they'd be happy to provide written evidence, is that then in response to the stuff, to whatever Northern Ireland Water says after they come in after NIA?
They said written or oral.
Yeah, so they said written or oral.
sorry.
So I think the committee's view from previous discussions on this is that we take oral evidence in relation to.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Sorry, I missed that,
yeah.
but I was just wondering,
Yeah.
is there scope for them to respond then in writing to the stuff if Northern Ireland Water come after them? Or do we get them both in again the following week in reverse order?
No, and it's a valid point, Mark. I mean, I'm only saying we were giving both of them the same opportunity to respond at the same time, so you'll have one set evidence session followed by another.
Yes.
So there will be a session by NIA, so it depends what we want to ask NIA. It could be slightly different issues, I don't know.
So Cal, I know that you weren't here last week, but and you will have got the email in relation to it, so we have been asked to provide themes in relation to NIEA and NI Water. Obviously those are themes, broad themes, not exact question, because I don't want to curtail the conversation whenever NIEA and NI Water come to the committee. But essentially what we're agreeing today is that we would schedule 2 separate evidence sessions, but my preference and what I believe needs to happen is that those would be on the same day, so that we take NIEA and then NI Water after, and those would be an open session, because I think it's important that we're as open and transparent in relation to what's going on.
No, absolutely, and I don't have any issues with that. My only issue, NIW is asked to respond second.
Yeah.
So NIEA will have presented their evidence first.
And then I think, Mark, going back to your point, there probably will be stuff that will come out of that NI Water session that we will have to then maybe go back and follow up with NIEA. You know, because obviously our first preference would have been that the two would have come together, but NIEA have said that they don't feel it would be appropriate, given that they are the environmental regulator for NI Water, that the two would sit together at the committee session.
That's reasonable enough, Chair. I mean, to get that point.
So, sorry.
Just to say, Chair, I mean, that's NI Water have suggested coming after the Environment Agency. It's entirely up to the committee if that's the way that they want to schedule it. If you would rather do it the other way, then that's up to the committee.
Yeah.
There's Northern Ireland Water is programmed in for the 15th of January. Are they-
Northern Ireland Water have indicated that they would be available on that date. Environment Agency haven't as yet.
But the Environment Agency are happy to come in after that because they need to know what we're actually going to be asking them about. All right in saying that? Because we're going to say to Northern Ireland Water, here's the themes that we're going to touch upon, guys. But if we have both on the same day in January, we're going to say Northern Ireland Water, here's the questions, or here's the themes we're going to touch upon. NIEA, you're just arriving to respond to, we don't know yet.
So,
Chair, I think the original debate of having the two together was to get an understanding why we can't do something with respect to development, where that is right or wrong. So we have the two people in the room to say, what do you think NIA, what do you think NIW, and have that debate. Now they're splitting it apart, so I don't see an...
Have we done that before? I mean, regulator and regulated at the same time, taking questions.
so Peter, can we...
Pitting them off
Sorry
against
to
each other.
interrupt you. Can we go back a step? So I know that you weren't at the committee in previous times, but what was agreed was that we would provide themes to NI Water and NIEA in terms of what was going to be discussed. So NIEA, again, it's for the committee to decide this. NIEA coming in, and then NI Water would come in as well. And there will be, you know,
Actually, it would depend. Even who comes in first would inform the conversation better, because you're able to say, oh, NIEA, you guys are in, or Northern Ireland Water, you're in. We were told in the last session X. Like, it just feels a bit, I don't know, regulator against regulated. It feels as if we're pitting them off against each other. I wasn't at that meeting, granted, but I'm just wondering, has that been done before?
so the NI Water meeting that we were at in Myola, obviously that is where this came from in relation to NI Water's answers to the questions, and NIA came up quite a bit in relation to capacity modelling and all of that. So that's why, as a committee, obviously we felt it would be good to bring NIA in. But again, this is for the committee to decide today in terms of how we schedule this, but it's too great and too important of an issue, and you know, sorry, Ken.
Absolutely, Chair, and I totally agree with it. To me, it doesn't matter. Whoever comes first, that's going to set the tone of the conversation. So even if NAW was first, to me that doesn't matter. My point then is, I would ask whoever is first, will they then have an opportunity to respond again? Because what's happening is, whoever gives their evidence first, that evidence will be here live, and it'll give the second team coming in an opportunity to respond to that, as well as your theme, right? So it would be only right then for if NIE go first, that some matters may raise his head. Now, they might have to come back and write in this, I don't know, we're out of time. But that's my point about it, because the first briefing is going to formulate whatever the second says. That's all I'm saying. So it doesn't matter either way. If it was NIW first, it would be the same. NA, it would be part of the conversation. So it's to be fair to both of them, to give them an opportunity to respond properly. That's all. And that's why I asked closed session, because then nobody would know. But I don't mind the live session. I'm not trying to hide them, but live session, and as long as whoever goes first, the second team will have a different view and they'll have a different response. So it's to give them an opportunity again to respond to some of the points that's raised by the second group. That's all I'm
Would it
saying.
not be more appropriate given Belfast Lock? I mean, I actually tried to raise this yesterday in the chamber and was quite annoyed that I wasn't able to, given the Spotlight programme. Would it not be more appropriate to get Northern Ireland Water in first, and then the ministers from the NIA have said that they're more than happy to come in to inform that conversation? Like, I've been dealing with this for the last couple of weeks. It's incredibly technical stuff, so I think it would be really good to be able to give them themes and they're able to come in after. I mean, we've got Northern Ireland Water prepped and ready to go for the 15th, and then NIA have said they're happy to come in following that discussion.
So I think, like, it is for members to decide. I suppose that's another proposal. So I think that it stems from Myola and the conversations that were there. We know what the issues are with NI Water. We've had NI Water in now. We've been twice with NI Water. We've had a range of discussions now on NI Water to do with the Royal Society of Architects, we've had CEF in as well, and that's why NIEA we're going to come in, and then NI Water. The preference was to have the two of them together, but we're in this scenario, so we have to make a decision. So, look, there's two options there. Either NIEA, I think we're broadly content that they will come in separately. Am I taking that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, NIEA first or NI Water? What's the preference, Mark? Did you want to?
I think NIEA first. Maybe we've heard from CEF and RUAH and others, and a lot of the focus has been on the, I suppose, economic impact of Northern Ireland Water's shortcomings. NIEA will be able to fill us in, I suppose, on the environmental impact as well as their job as the environmental regulator and what they're asking of or demanding of Northern Ireland Water. We'll have Northern Ireland Water and then thereafter, but we will then need to go back to NIEA regardless.
An opportunity to respond,
Have them come back to us.
It says in the response from NIEA, would welcome the opportunity to provide the committee with written or oral briefing about matters which fall within its responsibility as the environmental regulator if the issues raised by the committee are deemed appropriate for response by Minister of Dira. So, I mean, I wasn't at that meeting at Myola. What were the concerns that were brought up in terms of the environmental regulation perspective of it all?
So I think it would be useful to go back and listen to that because they were very clear. To be honest, NI Water referred an awful lot back to NIEA in terms of their policies. The Deputy Chair had asked in relation to, you were here for the session with the Construction Employment Federation in terms of the 5-year rule with dereliction. And we asked quite clearly, where did that policy arise? Where is that from? There was no clear answers in relation to that, I think it's fair to say. And NIEA was referenced a number of times by NI Water in terms of what happens. I think also it's more pertinent as well, given the Spotlight programme. We've got a range of evidence now in relation to NI Water and how it is linked to so many aspects of infrastructure. And I think it's important that as an environmental regulator for NI Water, there are issues with dry spilling, how things are monitored, the pollution, the amount of tonnage. So I think those things need to be scoped out with NIEA, given that we've heard the vast range of evidence from NI Water. So that's why we're bringing NIEA to the committee.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I totally take that point.
So I think we've maybe had a good discussion on this. So for time's sake, I think, can I get a show of hands in terms of NIEA first into the committee before NI Water?
Sure, I would look bad if it divided on it. I mean, we've had a good conversation.
So am I taking a consensus
as long as we have, there's an opportunity for whatever group in your suggestion, as long as an opportunity to respond to some of the points. Was the first group will have already spoken, you know what I mean, to be fair.
An opportunity for the group, but an opportunity for us as members.
Well,
the first
that's the first,
will inform our questions to the second, which will then
we'll have to go back
we will have to, correct, and we will have to go back to NIEA regardless. This is going to be an ongoing piece. You know, we're not going to have everything.
No, it isn't,
sure,
but it's the use of the committee and the value we get out of it. That's what they're for.
Yeah.
But okay, we've had a good enough discussion.
I mean, Northern Ireland Water kind of we're having to apply these constraints because of NIEA, so there's that aspect, but then there's the other side of things where we'd be wanting to see where they're saying maybe NIEA are being too stringent in their approach to things, but there's people around this table who'll have a view that NIEA aren't being stringent enough in their approach on other but not unrelated matters, so there is a circular discussion. This is a circular discussion, but there's another one to be had. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, so I'm taking consensus then that we schedule the two separate evidence sessions, NIEA and then NI Water. Okay? Okay, so I remind members that it had been agreed to provide NI Water and NIEA with themes or areas of questioning in advance of the evidence session. The clerk emailed members directly to ask that these be provided by close of business by today. It had been intended that the committee staff would compile a list for agreement at next week's meeting before issuing to NIA and NI Water. However, given NIA's response, it might be helpful to provide the list of things and issues as soon as possible to enable NIA to confirm that officials are able to provide evidence and enable the committee to agree its forward work programme for January next week's meeting. So I'm suggesting that members provide details of the themes and issues they wish to the clerk by close of business by today, and suggested lists will then be circulated by email before issuing to NI Water and NIA. Content? Okay, thank you. Item 6 is correspondence at page 22. You'll see the correspondence memo. At page 6 of the table papers, you'll see Minister for Communities Briefing Service. And 4 members up further to the correspondence from the Minister for Infrastructure, which is included at page 42 of the meeting pack. The Minister for Communities has also advised that he is happy for his department to give further preliminary consideration to extending the existing bereavement services and will engage with counterparts in other departments. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the correspondence from both ministers. Content?
Read.
Thank you. At page 8 of the table papers, you'll see the Minister for Infrastructure oral statement to the Assembly on British Irish Council. I'm asking members if they are content to note the correspondence from the Minister advising of his intention to make a statement on the 10th of December on the ministerial meeting of the British Irish Council Planning and Places Work Sector, which took place on the 8th of November. So I'm asking members if they wish to comment or raise any issue on any other items of correspondence. Content? Okay, I'm seeking agreement that members are content to note the correspondence and the suggested actions as contained in the correspondence memo in the pack. Content? Yeah? Okay, item 7 is the electric vehicle public charging infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure task force, DFI oral evidence. At page 187, you'll see the clerk's memo, EV infrastructure task force. At page 192, you'll see the update on the electric vehicle infrastructure task force written evidence. At page 199, you'll see Annex 1, update on progress against the electric vehicle infrastructure action plan from DFI. And at page 202, official report of ANI, 18th of September 2024. At page 10 of the table papers, you'll see ESB response regarding levelling up funding and EV charging infrastructure. And at page 14 of the table papers, you'll see the utility regulator response regarding barriers, constraints or regulatory requirements to increasing the number of EV charging points. So, welcome to the committee today, Ms. Sian Kerr, Director of Transport Planning and Policy, Mr. David Strahan, Head of Transport Decarbonisation Unit, Mrs. Claire McAlevey, Transport Decarbonisation Unit, and Mrs. Sarah McGurkian.
Ciara McGurnahan.
Ciara McGurnahan, sorry. Transport Decarbonisation Unit. So I'm seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard today. All in agreement? Yeah.
Good.
And I'm inviting, we do have obviously the substantial amount of written evidence to the committee as well in relation to this, and obviously we had you in relation to the vets as well. So I'm just asking you to make a brief opening statement of 5 minutes, and then I'm keen to come to members' questions then. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought it would be helpful to set today's update on the task force in the wider context of transport decarbonisation. We cannot underestimate the challenge net zero represents, especially in relation to transport. Most of us rely on a form of motorised transport every day, whether that is a car, the bus or the train, to go about our daily lives. And it is this reliance that has led to the transport sector here being the second largest contributor to emissions after agriculture, with 64% of our transport emissions relating to the use of cars. Advice from the Climate Change Committee and modelling undertaken by the Department has shown that a focus on removing car emissions through the transition to zero-emission vehicles will have the most significant impact on reducing carbon emissions from the transport sector. Members will already be aware of the pivotal role that the EV Infrastructure Taskforce has played in creating the commercial platforms that have led to significant growth in the provision of EV charging, be that on street, at shopping centres, schools, sports clubs, or at workplaces across Northern Ireland. The EV market is now in a healthier position than ever before, with both a marked acceleration in EV uptake and through the significant continued growth in the provision of commercially led EV infrastructure. The acceleration in EV uptake has seen the total number of EVs on local roads doubling to over 30,000 since December 22, and encouragingly this growth in numbers can be seen right across Northern Ireland. The EV infrastructure picture also remains buoyant, with over 20 commercial providers now operating here, with the most recent quarterly growth here ahead of that of Great Britain. Public charge point numbers have grown here by 65% since April 23, comparing favourably with growth across Great Britain of 61%. The growth in rapid charge points, which offer more convenient, faster charging opportunities, sits at over 300% in the same period, significantly above England, Scotland and Wales. Consumer confidence has also greatly improved, as evidenced by the Avani recent survey, showing the enhanced faith consumers have in both EV range and in accessible EV infrastructure. Against this backdrop, the introduction of the vehicle emissions trading schemes here in January 25 will further consolidate the progress made to date and provide the confidence needed to both industry and consumers to further accelerate the transition to zero-emission cars and vans. Whilst we need to maintain the momentum in this space, including progressing the provision of cross-pavement charging solutions for EV owners without access to off-street parking, we need to consider how a renewed focus on transitioning other vehicles, such as light good vehicles and heavy good vehicles, buses and coaches, to zero-emission fuels can be accommodated. This will complement the needs of the evolving transportation markets, tying in with the remaining actions of the Taskforce, which will concentrate on the needs of the strategic road network and the services that support the network. We've also made significant progress in seeking to find a solution for cross-pavement charging for those who do not have access to home charging, and we'll be happy to update you on this work today. A new approach to communication of information around EV issues is also being considered in conjunction with our counterparts across the UK following the introduction of the ZEV mandate in Northern Ireland. This will seek to provide potential EV owners with more accessible information around owning and charging electric vehicles and the very important role that they will play in decarbonising the transport sector. At its inception, it was agreed that the EV Infrastructure Taskforce should be fluid and adaptable to the changing environment of the EV infrastructure needs in Northern Ireland. As we look towards future actions necessary to support the decarbonisation of the transport sector here, specifically those relating to freight, bus and coach, there is an opportunity for the Taskforce to evolve so that it continues to add value in this space. I hope this short update has been helpful, and we are very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Gold star for being there on time, so thank you for that. First question, I just noted there that you'd said in terms of the vets that obviously we're all very well aware of here in this committee, that more accessible information will be there for consumers. So how's the task force then ensuring that that will be the case from now on in? Because we did have obviously NFDA into the committee. There still are concerns on the ground, I think, with some car dealerships. So what's happening now in terms of the task force to speed up and ramp up that information to consumers?
Sure. I think that it was important that the 4 jurisdictions after Northern Ireland was included in the ZEV mandate from the 1st of January 2025, that they looked at how the mandate would be taken forward in future now that Northern Ireland was included. But also just from a wider DFT perspective as to how we could start to improve the messaging that there was. So if there were going to be more electric vehicles coming into the market, we wanted people to be more informed about what their individual opportunities were, how that fitted in with workplace need, or whether it was individuals making a decision to buy a new vehicle. And we see a lot of press coverage in respect of electric vehicles, some of it positive, some of it not so positive. And I think the time had come, if we were moving towards setting targets for vehicles to come into the market, that people had that understanding. So by the time that they came to make a decision to change their vehicle and move to electric, that they had the information, that they were confident that it would suit their individual needs.
Okay. So will the department itself be doing any sort of marketing campaign or anything in relation to that? Because I'm still not sure that is hitting the road, pardon the pun.
So it is something in terms of our wider comms around transport decarbonisation that, we know that there is more we could do around, we know the perceived barriers to owning an EV, and some of it is around a lack of information. How do I charge my car? Where do I charge it? How long does it take? All of that. And so we are working internally around what that might look like, but we're also working with DFT colleagues and colleagues in Wales and Scotland to look at combining those messages so that we're not further confusing things by all having slightly different messaging. So we're very much in that kind of development phase to work out what is actually, there is a lot of information available already, but it's located in different places. So trying to bring that together under a wider banner is something that we're very interested in pursuing. But it has to add value and it has to be the right thing, and we don't want to duplicate and create more confusion.
Yeah. And is there timescales in relation to that? And does that also include, I'm very conscious last week in Westminster this was raised in terms of incentivisation for consumers as well. Is there conversations that are going on at the minute in relation to that?
So in terms of the timescales for the communications piece, it's ongoing at the minute. There are no specific timescales around when we want to do it, but it has got more focus, and we've probably got a meeting soon in terms of with the colleagues across the UK about what we need to do. So I think now that we've got the ZEV mandate piece done, the team is looking then what the next step is, and it's this communications piece.
And the incentivisation
The incentivisation piece, it isn't something that we are looking at. You'll be well aware of the funding position within the department, but there are, what we have tried to do is make sure there is awareness around grants that are available from others, such as OZEV and the Shared Island Fund and the like. So we've been trying to maximise awareness of other grants that are available.
I think that's very important to us, Chair, that there are opportunities for grants to be made available, and if we can make sure that our engagement with key stakeholders through the EV Infrastructure Taskforce and our general stakeholder engagement, they understand what is available to them and how they can actually avail those grants, that will help move those things on.
So following on from that then, we're hearing a bit more in relation to financial transaction capital. So what scope would there be to utilise some of that as a funding incentive to the private operator to invest more widely across Northern Ireland?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but we can find out and come back to you on the FTC issue. Yeah.
That would be welcome.
Yeah.
And if you could keep the committee informed in terms of the communication messaging as well, and if there are any further discussions around any incentivisation models that may come down the track, whether that I'm obviously looking to Westminster in terms of where that conversation gets to, or lack of conversation, but it would be interesting to see where that goes as well.
I think it's worth adding that a lot of this, most people don't buy new cars generally even now, so a lot of the affordability of an EV will come through the second-hand market, and that is something that we see growing, and that is probably where it will become more practical for more people to look to buy whenever that market, second-hand market, is strengthened. So I think that it's not just always about buying a new vehicle.
But Chair, there are a number of, as far as the incentivisation side of things is concerned, I think everybody's probably well aware that, in the private car market, that the grants sort of ramped down as the vehicles were being sold. But there are still car vehicle grants available for accessible vehicles. There are grants for taxis, there's grants for motorcycles, there are grants for small trucks and larger trucks. So in that harder to electrify sector, we still have those grants that are available on a UK-wide basis, and then there are still some charge point grants available for landlords or for putting charge points in the car park. So there are still incentives that are sitting there underneath that are helping drive those other harder to electrify sectors.
If I could come in there, David. Chair, just on that, the workplace charging scheme, we now in Northern Ireland have 1,000 sockets. And part of that scheme with over £380,000 in grants totally that has been provided. Also the charge point and infrastructure grant for business staff and fleet car parks has a further 109 charge points. So that's the uptick here in Northern Ireland has been positive in that respect. So,
and then in addition to that, there's the Shared Island Fund, which has another 48 coming into the market in the next year, possibly with up to 4 at each of those.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of, I just want to touch on the grid capacity before I move on to other members. So I was looking at the utility regulator and what they have had to say just in relation to it, and they were saying that by 2030 they're allowing 300,000 electric vehicles onto the grid. How many are likely to be on the grid by 2030 in your view?
I really don't think that we can that we can actually speculate as to what that number is going to look like. I mean, we've got a new UK government. We've got to look at what those how the ZEV mandate operates, whether or not the number of vehicles that are coming in, and how those arrangements work to bring vehicles in. So I don't think we can speculate. I think the important thing is, from our perspective, is that we've been working with both the FE and the utility regulator in respect of the socialisation of connection costs. Now, I think it's important to sort of set out the fact that at the minute, connection charging was a big issue for CPOs coming into the market. And if this work that the utility regulator is doing with the FE helps to reduce the burden on CPOs to allow those connections to be made, and that consultation process will be taking place in the new year, it will help to create that grid capacity and availability, particularly in rural areas or in areas where it's difficult to bring that supply out. So that's something, again, that was one of the original actions of the Taskforce, and something that has, we've really been able to make progress on over the last 2 years.
Do you have any concerns at this moment in time in relation to grid capacity? I mean, rural areas is a key.
I think that's something that both the utility regulator, DFE, and systems operators, are looking at, from their perspective. I mean, what we're hoping is that the work that they're doing now, in conjunction with us looking at what the strategic road network might look like, what we're going to need. And this is not just about private cars. It's, if we're starting to look at freight and the logistics sectors, and how those vehicles will move, given that we have no rail freight, so everything moves by road. We're going to have to look at that broader side of things. And Sharon made the point in her open comments that we want to sort of move beyond just looking at private cars and saying, right, well, how is our broader supply chain going to work from a transport perspective in future? And those connections are going to be critical to that.
Okay, I'm going to move now, Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. There's some really positive stats within that, but I suppose, just as the Chair alluded to, and you said yourself, Shan, there is still a scepticism and tentativeness out there among the public, and I certainly see that in my constituency inbox, and people who either consider buying an electric vehicle or who have bought one but still feel that they're a little bit wary about how far they can travel. To that end, I mean, how confident do you, even given the stats you've given about regional balance around the country, it's all well and good talking about percentage increases, but is that a consistent percentage increase across the country, first of all? And where do you think we need to be in terms of charging points going forward to meet the year-on-year demand?
So I don't have the stats to hand, but I know certainly from that the spread is pretty good across all the different areas. I think in terms of the charging, most people charge at home. So, you know, the link between availability of public charge points is important, but more for the longer distance travelling or visitors and people who don't have access to home charging. But so, you know, we see there is a positive story. We don't see the sort of concentrations of, you know, say everybody's buying Belfast. That isn't, you know, it's pretty widespread.
We should be benefiting from the small size of our country in that respect, then, shouldn't we, in terms of how popular the vehicles should be?
Oh, look, there's quite a few ways in which we're benefiting. So in one way, because we were, I suppose, later to the game in terms of the Climate Change Act, we have the benefit of seeing how others have looked to do these things and seen what has worked and what has not worked, and being able to utilise that. And so we're now seeing from a place of, for sure, being behind in terms of charge points and growth and all that, to a point where we have the momentum and we are moving faster towards, you know, more EVs, more charge points. So it's going in the right direction quickly. So that is very positive. So do you have the... Sorry.
Well, just to come in there on the Shared Island Fund itself, if we talk about different regions, 62% of the 48 sites from that Shared Island Fund are west of the ban. So, I mean, that's positive. Also, Avani have sent out a recent report detailing future and what it would look like in terms of planning or what's in planning. So, at the minute, there's 48 charge points sort of within planning development. There's 129 for approval, waiting consultation, and there are 130 applications for charge points with planning. So and that's about a total of 300 coming our way. We also have our works at about 127, and you have what I just said about your Shared Island Fund of 48. So that's averaging about 500, which would really see a double of our current network over the next... Well, hopefully, over I can't.
But it's very positive.
So,
yes,
that's
undoubtedly.
John, I think the other thing about that rural aspect of it is that I suppose in many ways, if you look at it's those people who live in rural areas that need a car most. But because they live in rural areas, they generally speaking have, you know, access to a driveway or cartilage and will be able to use home charging and be able to avail of, you know, lower rates for that charging. So we think that's been, you know, again, that's something that we're trying to sort of build on, the fact that, well, if you do need a car, you absolutely need a car, well then those opportunities are there for you. And I think that's certainly working for people who need their car in those types of areas.
Just in terms of then where the sites are, is it fair to assume that the low-hanging fruit in terms of the most cost-effective and beneficial places have been taken, and will we need to be more creative in terms of where they're now located to keep up with the ramped-up demand that's going to come year after year as people move towards more electrification, or is there enough space out there?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. From the point of view that if you look at the...
Yes, you answer the question once. Yes.
Yeah, Cal, if you look at the original I was here before, the original e-car programme where, you know, we had no charge points, no sites, we had to go looking for, you know, opportunities to put that original network into the ground. And then once we moved into this new commercialisation phase and the charge point operators started to come in, well, they were looking for partnerships with people who had, you know, locations at the right points, which were that they could, you know, commercially benefit from. So that work has that sort of moved to get those sites tied up, and in a competition perspective, we've got the other big utility, or some of the big other telecoms utility like BT and Virgin looking at how they can use their assets to come into this market. So that is continuing to evolve, you know, and as you can see, shopping centres and schools and all sorts of other places have been, you know, utilised, and particularly at sports clubs, those clubs could then actually benefit from that and generate some revenue because they will get paid by the charge point operator to have those on their sites, and that's where people are going and spending their time and leisure time.
It wasn't intended to be disparaging, by the way, in terms of the project.
No,
It was more just an assessment. Hopefully it didn't come across that way. No, that's useful to know. The final one, just, Chair, is on cross-pavement charging, which you talked about. Have you done an assessment in terms of how many cross-pavement charging points we might need going forward, given, you know, maybe people living in apartments and who wouldn't have necessary access to home charging points, where that would need to get to? Or are we still in the process?
I'm going to say something very quickly and I'm going to pass to Claire. Claire's been doing the work. Claire, since we were last here and we said that we were hoping to find a solution to this. So we believe that the demand at the minute is actually quite low. If you look at the contact that we've had from the department, but we recognise that, you know, whether the demand's low or not, it's not an issue. It's whether or not we can provide a solution. And we believe that we can provide a solution, and we believe that we can provide a solution within existing areas. So we're hoping that we'll be able to avail of both engineered solutions where people need those, and we're hoping to be able to utilise cable protectors, which are used in all sorts of other environments, to be able to assist people who need to cross the pavement. Okay, and we'll pass to Claire and she'll tell you about how we've got to that point.
So we've been engaging with stakeholders, OZEV, local authorities across the water, the solution providers that are again operating across the water, disability organisations, and out of the disability organisations, there's no, for what suits one disability, not necessarily suit another disability. So I don't know that we're going to get a consensus approach with that, but also then our engineering staff in DFI. There's no consensus across the UK on what approach works best. Some local authorities are adopting cable protectors, some are adopting engineered solutions. We are hopeful that we can, within the current legislation, we believe we can adopt both through the consent process and the streetworks licence process. So there are concerns around ownership, liability, provision of liability insurance, and there is also likely significant cost to the department, and obviously staff allocation where there is limited resources there. But in terms of the cable protector, it's currently widely used in construction. It's a low cost, a cheap alternative. It's temporary where it can be put in, put out, and then the liability and responsibility is with the user, and they would have to get insured against that. In terms of the engineered solution where they're excavating the footway, we have currently two residents who are willing to go through the streetworks licence process. Mobility operations are hopefully going to sponsor maybe another 2 or 3 to go through the process, and we're trying to establish the process of getting those in the ground, basically.
Okay, that's really useful. Thanks very much.
Interesting also to see that if you look at the number of vehicles that come through the Motability scheme, that if you take the engineered solution, it's actually, given some of the mobility issues that people have, actually quite difficult for them to force a cable into one of these channels. So Motability operations have been looking at solutions for that, so tools that will help someone to actually bring the cable through that engineered solution, and we've agreed to work with them to see if we can look at that as well. Why we're trying to get the processes right, John. It's to get that process right, so everybody knows exactly what they can ask for and when.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cahill.
Yeah, Chair, most of the questions have been asked. I should have got in more, John. No, I just want to go back to it because it was an interesting point. But see in terms of, I mean, I heard a report in the radio this morning, 250,000 cars, especially used to in and out of Belfast. I mean, travelling in and out. I mean, it's a lot of vehicles. And you're right, rural people are relying on single vehicle use. What are we doing to work with councils to try and incentivise that? Now, I'm not talking about just open countryside. Everybody thinks rural is just open countryside. It's not, it's smaller settlements. So in terms of working with local authorities to try and drive that forward, where it's using their buildings, their parks, or anything like that, where's that conversation at the minute, or what are we trying to do to incentivise on that?
Just to clarify, in terms of providing the charge points, because I think like the other issue that you've mentioned is around the traffic coming in to Belfast. So I think it's important to separate two different issues in terms of, one is how we decarbonise transport and one is how we deal with congestion. An EV takes up exactly the same amount of road space as a petrol diesel car.
But the whole thing is decarbonisation.
Yeah.
So unless we provide better public transport, we're
Yes.
still going to have so it's
Yeah.
not about congestion. I'm only
Okay.
saying about I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
But if we're serious, that's 250,000 vehicles, even the electric vehicles. Then you can
Yeah.
argue the congestion issue. But all I'm saying is, that's the kind of thing we need as a rural representative. We're trying to encourage decarbonisation and use of it. They've no choice at the minute because unless we build a railway out there or railway stations out for the people out in the west of the
Here.
So I mean, all I'm saying is we have to. Yes, congestion was an issue I brought up, but my main point is try to incentivise people to move away to using electric vehicles. So how do we work with local authorities and everybody else to try and get those and incentivise people into buying more?
I think this sort of ties in with, do you remember we had advised the committee that there were really only two of the actions from the EV infrastructure action plan that were left to do, and that was looking at the park and ride availability and also looking at the strategic road network. Okay, so within that piece of work, we want to sort of look and say, well, what is the future going to look like in respect of how people continue, whether they use public transport, whether they use active travel, to get the public transport, how this all ties in together. So if they're charging at home, but they were driving to park and ride, which we want them to do, and then get onto public transport, they're not necessarily always going to need, charging facilities at that park and ride site. But other people who are passing through that park and ride site on the strategic road network might. So it's about trying to look to see how all of these things are going to join up together, along with the other strategic plans that we have just for the wider transport decarbonisation.
Okay, we'll get a wee bit technical now. Going to John's point about he asked earlier on. I mean, surely we should be, and I'm not putting it all on urban settings, but it's going to be market driven. So where the big market is going to be in around the major urban settings to try and drive that market, and it's easier to provide all that within an urban setting, so then that spreads out evenly right across the board, and that's the kind of bigger conversation we have. And I mean, just in terms of the task force, who all's driving that bigger question? And I appreciate to see here your action plan, but in light of what's going on at the minute, we need to have a bigger plan to drive that all. And I think it has to be market driven, and maybe that's through the urban areas.
Clearly, the department chairs that task force, and it was originally put together, and Shan's mentioned before about it being fluid, but we've also there's other working groups. So we have a council fleet working group, we've got our NICS fleet working group, which the department is taking forward, looking at all those other vehicles that are in there. CBI have an EV working group. There's so much expertise out there that one of the things that we're trying to look at the minute is, well, how can we further enhance that task force to bring in other players and to look at how we can sort of start to build these other issues into something that was done just to meet the actions, sort of commitments that were in the energy strategy. So this is about looking at that wider process. So we're hoping to start to think about how we could do that.
Well, fair enough, because it's all about on the climate change and decarbonisation. I see in another few years' time when we haven't met the target, then it's going to cost twice as much. Now's the opportunity to start driving those conversations, Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Cahill. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, folks, for the presentation. Just to go back briefly on the cross-pavement charging issue, and it is interesting. It's good to hear progress on the two solutions from you were last in, the engineer and the cable cover, but I suppose it does flag to me some practical concerns, particularly in the Northern Ireland context, and I'm keen to just hear if you had any discussions with the housing executive, for example. There's so many areas right across the country where people don't have the luxury of a driveway, for example, and it's on street parking only. But the key to that is, of course, they're unnamed spaces. So I just see the situation where knowing how sensitive these issues can be, you know, and obviously, as you mentioned, we do have the advantage of maybe being behind the curve slightly, where you can cherry pick good practice for, you know, from other jurisdictions. So I'm keen to hear how that.
We are aware Turbocharge has got some in the ground with the Housing Executive. In terms of new builds that the Housing Executive are doing and renovations, there is the building regulations where they are going to consider they're putting ducting in the ground for future. I think they found it's kind of good that we're coming behind the curve, because they found actually when they've put stuff in the ground, they need maintained, and if they're not used and they're not making money, then who's going to pay the cost of maintaining them? So we haven't reached out to the Housing Executive just yet, but it is in our to-do list.
So much historic stock, you know, Housing Executive stock is when it was built when cars weren't as prominent, you know, 60s, 70s and so on, and drive, you know, so many houses now have 1, 2, 3 cars, you know, so it is a real challenge.
I think it's interesting, Stephen. I mean, one of the things that we talked about before about the whole cross-pavement solutions side of things was the fact that if you look at terrace properties and the fact that, you know, cars were never static outside one property, so people were maybe parking on one side of the road one day, the next day they would come in and there were 3 doors up or 2 doors down. So, but on the Housing Executive, if you look at some of those other Housing Executive properties, you had like parking areas that were built in at the back of properties where, again, you didn't have dedicated parking, but you know, that was Housing Executive owned land. So it is something that you know, once we get these processes in place and we start to get the if people come to us and say, I live in a Housing Executive property, I would like a cross-pavement solution. Here's the curtilage, this is the wet fit. We will go out and work with them and talk to the Housing Executive about how we can, you know, assist if that falls within the processes that we're going to take forward.
The Terrace Street example that you mentioned, you know, we all sort of have experience of disabled parking bays, how sensitive they can be. People can get them, but their name's not on them. So anybody with a blue badge can park outside their door. And I do see huge challenges with this, to be honest. You know, part
of the process will be they won't secure a space outside their own door. But with EVs, they can charge like once every 10 days or once. They're not necessarily needing to be charged on a daily basis. So anybody interested in the cross-pavement solution would be fully aware.
Depends how far you're travelling too. How often you need to charge.
So what we're trying to do is find a balance here. So there's going to be all different types of users. People who are travelling, maybe only doing 300 miles a week, and you'd gone from the point, you know, that some of us who were doing, like I know, got my car MOT there, and I've only done 6,500 miles this year. So people different.
Appreciate hybrid working, so that's changed things too.
Sunday day with you there.
There's changes just in the dynamics about how we travel, and so these solutions that we're hoping for, there'll be a combination of both the availability of home charging, you know, even if there are issues in respect of availability of parking up there, but also the public charging that's available, workplace charging that's available. So people will be able to avail of different solutions and at different times, and hopefully that combination provides the confidence that they will be able to drive to where they want to and have the ability to be able to do that.
Yes, sorry, David, I could come on. You also have the works as well. So you've that is at the tender stage. We're aware now. Derry City and Strabane District Council lead the consortium on that, so it's for 9 councils out of the 11 here. But the purpose of the works is for to support charging for residents with off-street parking. So, albeit off-street or close to leisure centres and stuff. So.
Okay, I know there's plenty of work ahead on that one, I'm sure. And just finally then about the insurance of it, you know, what way from research is the best way that works, you know, in the rest of the UK, for example?
So most of car insurance and home insurance will cover for the use of the cable, and then to reduce the risk of the hazard. We're still researching that area and finding information. It's very difficult because it's new in UK as well. There's no case law, and there's no there doesn't appear to be.
Somebody falls and trips on the cable, maybe at the very end, you know,
who's the liability? By the car insurance.
Car insurance rather than home insurance?
The charger itself is home insurance, and the cable is car insurance.
Which everybody will have to pay a lot more for, probably, to cover these things.
Well, we have looked at a lot of the standard EV charging insurance policies have it, but I think looking at it was about a third of our insurance companies, but it would be up to the individual resident to look at their own insurance to insure it. Now it is an area we have looked at ourselves because we are worried, so it's not.
We also spoke with Weave recently, and they're obviously a commercial charge point operator, but they sliced their evening charge after 8 o'clock by 8:30, and they've seen a huge increase in the usage at that time. So they will also be wanting to get into that market and provide for those without driveways. It's an opportunity for them to make money in communities. So
I think that's why the procedural aspect of this is so important. We'd indicated that we know what the solutions are. There was never any suggestion that you couldn't actually, do these things. But it's getting it right in respect of those liability issues and in respect of, the different needs of footway users, the times at which they're used, the responsibility on people to actually look after the equipment that they're putting onto the ground if they want to use these solutions. And the fact that they realise that by putting it out and physically doing that, then they have to be insured to cover their own, thing. And that we will look to see whether or not those solutions are suitable for those particular areas.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming. Just a bit like Cathal, I think some of the questions have been answered, but just to sort of develop on them a bit more. You mentioned about, the low-hanging fruit being taken off, if that makes sense, but sort of still getting into those sort of community and local councils and voluntary sector and sports clubs. I suppose really, is there anything more that can be done to encourage that? Again, because these are important to the rural type areas, and it's a good way of expanding that. Do you want to answer that question first and then do the second question, or do you want to crack on with the second question as well, or what?
Do the first question.
Do the first question, the easy one for.
Yeah. I think it was Claire or Ciara said earlier, we have obviously the charge points that we have now on the ground, but there is a strong pipeline coming through across Northern Ireland of all these other chargers already coming in that are in the process of planning, or they've got planning and that they are in the process of actually being put on the ground. So we don't have concerns around, there is continued growth across Northern Ireland, and most people will charge at home. So, I think that is the first in terms of the context. We're not seeing that problem in terms of the, big pockets, in terms of like all the development in Belfast and none in rural areas. It is something that we keep an eye on for sure. Do you want to add into that, or?
I think that as far as the socialisation of connection costs is going to be part of the key to this. So there will be operators out there who will be looking at sites, particularly on the strategic road network, where they would like to take commercial advantage of those locations, but at the minute it costs them too much to actually put them into the ground. So they will be, making those plans, but also hoping that Mr. Murphy's decision to consider this will help them, move into those other areas. So it was a really positive approach to, what's going to come in future, and particularly with regard to the logistics sector and freight, which has to come at some point if we're going to get to net zero by 2050. So,
I suppose then just coming on to that there, really, you see some examples of these wonderful charging, infrastructure points where there's a renewable source of electricity for the charge, for the charge points. Is that something that's coming down the road as well? Again, you've seen council areas across the water that sort of take this on, and actually it's a win-win on both terms. There's financial incentives, there's the clean energy incentives and such like. So I just wonder, are those ideas or prospects or projects that you're aware of, or is there opportunity?
Well, At the present moment in time, we haven't really seen any of those types of developments, sort of coming forward here. But as demand grows and we see opportunities in the commercially for operators to come into the market, I'm sure we'd like to see this type of installations. A bit like when we looked at the hydrogen side of things, when the first buses came into Belfast and we put the hydrogen refueling station into Belfast, that was about creating capability. So if we had those vehicles, we had the infrastructure there. So yes, as demand grows, we may see that more of those types of installations.
Thank you. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Cathal, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to say first, thanks for raising Fermanagh and Rail for me. That's great. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. No, 2 quick points. Tell me, is it does all new builds now have fitted points, or is that's not in statute? Is it?
No, it's not.
No, not yet.
We're having those. I mean, I don't. It's not a case of a big stick to beat people. I mean, it's incentivising people. So it's not for new builds yet, is it?
No. We DOF are looking at the Efficiency and Performance of Buildings Directive, which was a few years ago, so we were looking at building regulations to be able to help us, say what was required to go into new buildings and what would be, how sort of larger renovated buildings were going to be, the EV infrastructure going in there. So they're continuing to explore that, and we'll probably get some further guidance as to how that's going to work over the next.
The sooner we have a look at that, the better.
Okay. Well, we'll keep. We are in touch with them. We do know that they're looking at it.
And just one quick point as well. Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. Ivani said there's people who's had electric cars and now moved away and moved back to. Is there much evidence towards that, or are you having conversations about that, or can you like to respond in relation to that?
I think that in terms of, I was looking at it last night in terms of the Ivani survey, and also there was a survey, was it ZapMap did a survey as well, and it was a very small number, like 3%, I don't know if anyone has this, where people who had electric vehicles were keen to go back. Vast majority were very happy with their vehicles, and would recommend them. So it's a small number.
Okay.
From survey data.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks, for coming on. It's good to hear some positive news, albeit, I suppose, bit by bit. But there are improvements. But we are still lagging behind other jurisdictions in terms of provision, aren't we? And we'll continue to do so despite your best efforts, without more buy-in. And I suppose it's not an unwillingness to buy in by the general public, I think, in the EVs, as much as in many instances an inability to do so due to the cost of the vehicles. In terms of, I'll commend you, David, in your role, and you should get a gold star for your own carbon footprint for being so small. But in terms of, I suppose, government leading by example, how are we doing there? I know there's good examples in public transport. I think of the electrification of the bus fleet in my own constituency. But in terms of publicly owned vehicles, be it vans, be it whatever, be it ministerial cars, how are we doing, and could and should the executive be doing more in that regard?
Well, I mentioned earlier on that we have both an NICS fleet group and also a council fleet group. One of the problems, Mark, is that a lot of the vehicles that we have in the public sector fleets. So if we look at, how are we going to electrify ambulances, fire engines, gritters, all of the other, all other harder to electrify vehicles. So there are trials ongoing in respect of using, HVO as a fuel, other alternative fuels that can replace some of those diesel and petrol alternatives. We have been, Claire's been leading the fleet group, where we've starting to look at a framework which will show what vehicles there are, what categories they're in, how we move towards those, and across councils and departments that we've been trialling electric vans and those ones that we can actually get moving on at the minute. But the other fleet issues are something that we need to tackle as the technology develops.
And I think it's, sorry, just as well before, I don't know if you have the information there, there's significant work being done as well by some of our partner organisations, so obviously TransLink and then iWater, but in terms of even the airports and the ports, we're seeing significant work around the decarbonisation of their I'll get the terminology wrong, but their fleet vehicles around the airports and the ports, which has been, they're very much leading the way on that as well, which has been helpful. We can learn from them as well.
So just the current position is really, it's at the early stages, and we're currently looking at and asking departments to sort of rationalise their fleet, what fleet's in use, what fleet's near an end of life, and there's no point in replacing vehicles that are just purchased within the last 3 to 5 years. So and the different trials they're doing, it's a knowledge share platform where they can share with each other. So as Shan explained, and Davy, there's a huge range of vehicles here, from your police vehicles to your ambulance service, and then obviously the likes of the executive office only has the one minister car. So it's all in the conversation. Whenever it becomes time for procurement opportunities where they have to replace the vehicles, then they are considering and looking to move to EV or HVO or hydro treated. Just depends on the types of vehicle.
Thank you. Sorry, Ciara, you've given a wee stat, and I missed the stat, but it was about the percentage of chargers
missed it.
west of the ban, and it's
62.
obviously with my dairy,
Yeah, I think it was
my red
6.
and white dairy hat on.
Yeah.
I know at the start of this year, I think it was in January, I'd read a report that Derry ranked 3rd worst city across the UK in terms of provision, and also didn't fare too well in terms of the number or percentage of broken chargers as well, or malfunctioning ones. And I know now that this is where confusion exists, and I'm an elected rep, I shouldn't be confused about it, but if I am, then the wider public are, and it's because DFI are out there and claiming, and maybe with justification, wins when there is investment to be made, but maybe not so forthcoming when there are issues around maintenance or expansion that might need addressed. So I'm just wondering, have we seen an improvement in
Yes,
Derry
sorry,
in
go back to your
particular,
stat
the
there,
second
Mark. It
city?
was 62% of the 48 sites, but that's for the Shared Island Fund, which is coming ahead. So if you talk about, you've got the Orcs as well, and Derry City and Strabane lead on that, and they will have...
I know there'll be something coming
Yeah,
on that. Of the
spread
48
across the 9
sites,
councils areas.
for the Shared Island Unit one, I don't think there's any actually in Derry City, but out of 48.
Yeah.
But it is something, and I know other areas feel also. And I get the argument that it's, not about people using these publicly owned ones every day, but for a city of Derry's size, a growing city like that, you've so many tourists coming and what have you. I think it's important it's better served.
I think, Mark, just on your point about the transparency in respect of what's working and what's not working. I mean, there was up until a couple of years ago, there was an issue with the existing charge point network in respect to the fact that it was run, owned, operated by ESB, and it had been in since the original EQIA project was put into the ground. I mean, the department took some steps to provide permitted development rights to allow them to upgrade those charge points. They have been working through a process to get those charge points upgraded. In the meantime, then we got a commercial market coming in where it's in the commercial operator's interest to make sure that they're working all the time so that they're actually generating revenue. So we now have a different dynamic in respect of the charge points that are available and working. We've also got the technology through ZapMap and through the the technology that's in vehicles to allow people to look and say, there's the charge point I want to go to. Is somebody at it? Is somebody charging? And is it working? So with that information based on how people, you know, perceive it is changing, because they're actually physically got something in front of them that will tell them where they can go to and what they can use. And there's significant, you know, ability for them to charge at home now as well. So it is that dynamic of publicly available charging infrastructure has changed even over the last couple of years.
And I think, sorry, it's just in terms of like the Avani survey, I think that point around just the change in the last 2 years has been significant. And I think, you know, there are anecdotes from 2 years ago that are just don't apply now, you know. And in terms of one of their statistics, you know, in 22 more than 2/3 said they had to wait very often or always for a charger. Last year that fell to 25. This year it's down to 12. So in the 2 years, you know, that is a significant improvement, and it's still going the right way. So I think, you know, we need to be mindful that it is changing considerably all the time and getting better. So
That's how much the landscape seems to be able to change very quickly, because I mean 10 years ago we were ahead of the curve, if I recall. At least that's
yeah, we did. We had an all island.
We fell away behind.
We had an all island interoperable network that you could use the same card to charge in Portrush as you could in Cork. Sorry, I remember saying that here before at one time. But that network at that time was put in, you know, to create that capability for electric vehicles actually coming onto the scene completely. You know, now, you know, 10 years on, you know, we're seeing a completely different approach to this, where if you look towards, you know, a 2030, 2035, you know, banning petrol diesel cars, depending on what government decides, and then you go towards net zero 2050. Everybody is sort of moving to try and make sure that they get part of that commercial aspect of that market, and that's been really important. And if as a department and in the partnership we have with other key stakeholders, we can help enable that, then that's really what the push has been, to try and make sure that we do everything that will allow them to be able to maximise those opportunities and provide services for citizens that want these want the opportunity to charge at different locations other than home.
Okay, thank you. There's just a couple of points that I just wanted to mop up in relation to that come up during the course of the discussion. I just want to go back to the Streetworks application process. So those are being looked at individually. So resourcing is always a problem in relation to this, and getting that rolled out as quickly as possible. So what consideration has been given to those resourcing requirements that would obviously see those process quicker?
Our team, Transport Decarbonisation Unit, we're going to manage the influx of applications. At the minute, we're really not seeing huge inquiries. We're not even getting one a week. But if we're going to manage the influx of application, the information gathering, until we can then provide stats, and we'll feed that back then through our senior management.
What's the threshold then? Do you know what would be the threshold in terms of the applications that would come in to get the resources in place? You know, I think it's important that we have resources in place for that time when the influx does come in, because, you know, we don't want anything being held back.
This is something that we've had that's part of this whole process side of things, because what we don't want is, you know, a situation where you would have an influx of applications and then our section officers not being able to get site inspections carried out and have the time to be able to do that. So what we're trying to do is to look at a phased approach here, where we've actually gone out and sought partners and said to people, look, You've been in touch with us. We will help you take through this process. We will talk to our engineers. We will see how, you know, our policy unit can help that on the ground. So we will try and manage this and look at the trends that there will be in respect of the number of vehicles come in. But as Claire says, it is actually still quite low. But we'll have to look at how those processes work. And how the actual the solutions work as well, so that we can see how we move this forward.
I think, you know, you'll all be aware of the resource challenges across the department, particularly with our roads colleagues. Everything we are doing is trying to learn from others to avoid unintended consequences that make things worse. So, you know, the ability to look at a process that is as streamlined as possible whilst achieving the outcomes that we actually need is a core part of the reason why we are trying to be as proactive as possible in working with actual people and actual scenarios to see what we can learn from those. You know, we don't want to be in the situation where, you know, this becomes another thing that we're not resourced to deal with. But at the same time, we have to find, we all need to work together, you know, to find ways in which we can make this process as easy as possible. And I think the benefit at the minute is that, you know, we are only seeing these cases and we're working really proactively with them, you know, as opposed to a theoretical discussion around how this could work, actually going out and talking to people and working with partner organisations to see how we can do it. It is going to be a challenge, especially if we do see a big increase, but it's one that we know that we have to find a way to address.
And then I'd noted down there that there's 130 applications currently in the planning system. This committee knows how the planning system is at this moment in time and would have concerns around the time that it takes. Do you have concerns around the 130 that are currently in the planning system? And again, this is all about quick rollout of, you know, we have the mandate there, so it's about getting people online as quickly as possible. So, you know, in terms of that 130 applications, is there concerns there about the length of time in planning?
I think the charge point operators, in respect of if, you know, from those commercial perspectives, have been particularly ESB and the retrofit programme had been you know, seeking the department's assistance to be able to you know, talk to the councils, because it's local planning that we're talking about here, and you know, we've tried to again sort of facilitate those conversations, but also some of those planning applications will maybe sort of put on hold because we're waiting for the outcome of the socialisation of connection costs. So we you know, my branch is not aware of any particular issues, but certainly if CPOs were talking to us about it being a barrier to them, you know, we'd be happy to talk to our colleagues in local councils in respect of that particular aspect of it.
Okay, and then just very quickly 2 points, then I want to ask just one more substantial question. So if you can, just the car insurance issue, picking up on Stephen's point there, that is a massive concern for consumers, and, you know, having that extra cost that's put upon people. The committee, I have engaged with the FCA in relation to the Taskforce that's been set up looking at car insurance. Is that something that yourselves are doing in relation to EV charging points and the costs that may incur with liabilities?
So we're aware of the task force being set up by DFT. Their minister, there was a recent transport interministerial group where the other ministers were briefed on the task force. I believe we have representation from for Northern Ireland from DOF, and at the minute, we're just keeping in the loop with that. It's not something that we are particularly feeding into. I think it's a general issue for motor insurance, irrespective of whether it's EV, petrol or diesel. And so that's where we are. I
suppose it's just that specific point in relation to the cabling and liability, and I think it's really important that we feed that through regardless and make sure that it is on people's radars, because we can't assume nothing in life is my sort of mantra. So you know, I think it's important that we're feeding that through, those government sort of agencies, to use that term, that feed through is there in relation to that.
No, that's fair.
And then I am a bit concerned that there hasn't been engagement with the housing executive in relation to it. I think, they are a key component in relation to that off-street charging points. They are a huge housing association here in Northern Ireland. I think it's important that we are feeding through to those housing associations. Is there any engagement planned in the very near future for that? I know you said it's on your to-do list.
Yes, we are.
My to-do list is probably just as long as yours. So, is there engagement going to happen pretty quickly and soon on that?
Yeah.
So your point is noted, and we will. I think as everywhere else, we have we'd love to have more staff working on this, and the team have been working really hard to look at the cross-pavement solution, but yes, we will reach out to the housing executive.
And just on the insurance for the cable cover, the residents that we are taking through the Streetworks licence process, we have asked them before we take them through to check with their insurance, and it's already built into their current EV cover. So as soon as you get cover for an EV, that's part of the package. It appears we're going to get evidence as the process goes through.
Okay, thank you. And then my last and final question is, the utility regulator has said about the electric vehicles smart charging points regulation, which is in GB. What is covered by this legislation, and what consideration has been given to introducing that legislation here?
So, we will. As far as the
question to finish off with, sorry.
Thanks very much, Chair. The legislation itself, I will need to go back and look at. Okay, but I think the important thing about we don't have smart meters here, and I suppose that's a matter that DFE and the utility regulator will be looking at in future. So until we have smart meter and some of the benefits that there could be from, vehicle to grid and the other issues that there are, so it may be that it's too early for us. But certainly I'm happy to look at at how those are being implemented and how that ties in with the actual smart metering programme across the water that's in place.
Yeah, that would be great to get, obviously, that we're falling behind there, but it'd be good to get some more information as things progress on that. And no doubt you'll be back into the committee again anyway in relation to these matters. But look, members, I think that's us.
Unless you're going to bring back the DeLorean now, Dave. It'd be a good card to bring back in one. I don't know.
Look, thank you very much for coming to the committee. We really do appreciate your time. And sorry for keeping you waiting there just for a moment. But look, thank you very much. We do appreciate your evidence. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Cheers, thanks.
Bye.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, members, if you're content, was there anything that you wanted to raise coming out of that or check up on?
Joy, could we get some stats on the? Have you any stats on the urban versus rural figures? No. Not there. Can we get that?
I think I did.
In terms of uptake, is there something there, isn't there? Because I mean, like we asked, and so did John. I mean, this is going to be market driven. There's no doubt about it. And I mean, over the next number of years, it'll be interesting to see, because how are we going to incentivise rural people to? You can put in all these charging points, but it's about affordability and everything else, So
there's a couple of points that the officials had offered to come back on, so we can ask them.
Just see what the options are. I mean,
if they have, more detailed information on the urban-rural.
Because
spread.
the decarbonisation, what they're going on decarbonisations, that means, like, and if you hear all of us, those who travel the motorway, we know many vehicles coming down. So it's not about congestion or anything else. About because those people will rely on that until the point in time where public network transport's going on. That ain't going to happen, to be honest with you, over the next 10 years. I wouldn't have thought so. So
okay.
We're good to get some stats on that. Yeah.
Okay. Mark, were you looking at
Well,
that?
I suppose just to support that request for a kind of snapshot of where we're at, or where they are at in terms of the chargers currently, because now I referred to something that wasn't an anecdote from a couple of years ago. It was based on a report. I'll take out the actual report published earlier this year. So just to see that, and it could be good news if I mean we are moving swiftly, relatively swiftly in the right direction. That's good, but it would just good to know the facts.
And I meant to say just folks, remember we also did ask the councils to give us information back in relation to the fleets. I think that's coming next week.
Next week's, the responses we received will be in next week's pack.
And then we did also write to committees as well, just in relation to consideration there. So it was brought up during it, and I thought So content with that, and there are those points also that was raised just to follow up on. So was there anything else that people wanted to raise before we move on?
Just the and I don't know how significant it is, but see in terms of charge points on new builds, I mean, like, I know people were talking about housing side on these cross footpaths and all, but I mean, I wouldn't have thought it's a major issue. Now, I don't want to get into the legislative thing, but obviously it's a different department, but I would imagine going forward that would have been something to be fitted in new houses. Like, that wouldn't be hard to do when you're fitting the electric in at the time, charge points on it. You mean, as opposed to, you know what I mean, it's different if you don't have your own driveway in that, but a lot of the private developments now, surely the new builds would.
I have had constituents who have raised it. It does seem to be more coming to the fore, I think, in terms of housing associations.
It doesn't seem to be a requirement at this stage in new builds or private.
Keith, sorry, you were looking in.
Yeah, but the difficulty isn't parking. It's okay if you can park in your own driveway every night.
No, but that's what I'm asking about. See, going forward,
if you get into housing, development, an older development, depending, houses now have 3.5 cars per house instead of designed for half a car, so you don't get the same park. It's going to be a difficult one now. It's definitely a put off for charging.
My point is on the new building regulations, it wouldn't be hard to install I'm not talking about the cost or anything now, money.
So
if there's a new private development and I see a lot of the new ones now, they actually do put the charge points in. And I agree with all the 3 cars and all that. That's a slightly different matter.
So do you want to write to
Well, they did mention there that they had a conversation, yeah.
Do you want to write to Department of Finance and see what...
But we could write back to the department and see what conversations they had. Because David mentioned it there, right? Because he did say that they were having conversations about it originally. Okay. Just write them and see what's the update on that, yeah.
Okay. Members content with that? Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, now move on to item 8, which is the DVA 2024-2025 business plan. In your update written evidence at page 216, you'll see DVA 2024-25 business plan performance update. At page 219, Annex A, DVA 2024-25 business plan target update. At page 220, you'll see DVA key performance targets for 24-25. 4 members of the committee wrote to the department following its meeting on the 18th of September 24 to request a mid-year update on DVA performance against its 2024-25 business plan targets when available. At page 219, I just want to point out a few things. Annex A, you'll see target 1 highlights that the average wait time for MOT tests will be 6 weeks by the 31st of March 2025. However, the performance to date highlights that the 30th of September, the wait time is 62 days. So I'm just thinking that the committee might wish to seek some details on what specific actions are being undertaken over and above what has already been introduced to reduce those waiting times further for an MOT test. Mark, are you indicating?
Yeah, just to check maybe what we heard the last day they were in. I think there might have been improvements on that 62 days there, but it's the measure itself, I think, might be a bit skewed because the system is anomalous. That might be the waiting time for an appointment.
Yeah.
But we all know then if you ring up the week after and say, oh, my tax is due, do you know what I mean? You might get it then that day. So I don't know, could it be maybe broken down? Or it must be broken down further somewhere. The average length of time that people are waiting for a test as opposed to the average waiting time for an appointment. Yeah.
So you want to break down?
Maybe I think there maybe it's that sort of strange system.
Yeah.
That I think they're actually maybe selling themselves short here.
Okay. Ahol, did you want to come in?
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. Content with that? Yeah. I think that's fair enough point, just to double check what's actually happening there, and then obviously the specific actions over and above what's being done too would just be useful to find out. Target 8 is another one. So by 31st of March 25, we will achieve at least 8 of the 11's compliance and enforcement targets. The update highlights that all targets are on track for achievement. However, the committee might want to seek further detail on why were the targets set for achieving only 8 of the 11's compliance and enforcement targets, and then the year to date figures for each of the compliance and enforcement targets, just to double check what's happening there. You content with that? Yep. And then target 13 specifies that we will achieve the trading fund financial target to break even, taking 1 year with another. So the update highlights that a deficit is forecast for 24-25. So again, committee, I'm just seeking agreement that we'll seek further detail on the forecasted deficit for this financial year, including DVA's assessment of the underlying reasons for the deficit and detail of its performance against the trading fund financial target over the last 3 years. And then what is meant by taking 1 year with another as specified with the target. I'm not clear what that actually means. So it might just help in relation to understanding some of the budget considerations as well. So are members content with that? Mark, are you okay?
Well, it might be the average over 2 years or something.
I don't know.
If they overspend by 5 million 1 year, they underspend by the next. I don't know.
I don't know, but I think it would be good just to get some clarity to make sure. So happy enough to seek agreement to write the department to seek a response on the issues highlighted above. Was there anything else anybody wanted to add? Okay, thank you. Item 9 is the budget 24-25 written, final 2024-25 budget EQIA consultation report written evidence. So at page 223 you'll see the covering letter, DFI final 24-25 budget EQIA consultation report. At page 225 you'll see annex the final EQIA budget 24-25 outcome report November 24. Remind members that the committee considered the interim budget 24-25 EQIA on the 11th of September and asked that the committee was provided with the final report in advance of its publication. An embargoed copy of the report was emailed directly to members on the 29th of November prior to publication. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the report, or if there's any further information or clarification required. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Item 10 is the Department for Infrastructure Equality Action Plan written evidence at page 243, DFI covering letter Equality Action Plan at page 245, DFI Equality Action Plan at page 254, DFI Audit of Inequalities 22 to 26, And at page 287 is DFI Equality Scheme. So refer members to Action 10, which is the road safety measures, at page 251. It also advises that officials have engaged with disability organisations to discuss the issue of inconsiderate parking on pavements that forces users onto oncoming traffic. The department aims to ensure safe and accessible footways for Section 75 groups, in particular people with disability and dependent carers. So obviously members, I'm raising this because there was media reports last week which referred to the lapse in legislation which has led to an increase in pavement parking on Bedford Street in Belfast, which it's terrible for people who have disabilities, people with prams, etc. Like it is a danger. So I'm seeking agreement to write to the department to get information on, number one, what action is being taken to urgently address any lapse legislation to deal with pavement parking. Two, where else in Belfast or other towns across Northern Ireland has similar legislation lapsed. Three, what were the specific options identified following DFI's engagement with disability organisations and when these would be implemented? And lastly, how will the department ensure that enforcement teams are adequately resourced to deal with those parking illegally, including those using bus and taxi ranks? So does anybody have any other things that they want to add to that, or are they happy? Andrew?
Just to concur, because again, it's not just a Belfast issue, Chair, it's all over the place. And again, for people with disabilities, people with visual impairments, people with children, it is a hazard, it's a bane of everyone. But again, it's more as well just what you touched on at the end there, Chair, about the resources that can actually be applied to this, because again, it's one of these things that when everyone knows it's an issue, it seems to be something that doesn't necessarily get dealt with. So yeah, any communications and clarifications would be certainly.
Absolutely.
Yep, sorry.
There's definitely a regional spread in relation to this issue, and because I did have an issue that cropped up in my own constituency just in relation to it, which coincided with the public realm scheme. So it'll be interesting to find out some details just in relation to that. Just content with that?
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Item 11 is the forward work programme. So page 330 you'll see the draft forward work programme, and I'm seeking agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft forward work programme and to reflect any decisions taken today. Content? Okay. And then we'll come to any other business. Members, before I open it up, I just want to inform you, you may have seen it yourselves during the course of the committee, NI water workers are going to strike. So there's a work to rule which will commence on the 10th of December and then all out strike on the 16th of December. Given the start of our conversations, this is really concerning because the implications of this will be quite scary, you know, in terms of work getting done, emergency repairs, wastewater treatment, how that all outworks. So I think urgently, I think the committee might want to reach out to the Minister, Department of Finance and NI Water to see what is being done urgently to try and resolve this issue. You know, I think we can all agree it's important that workers get their fair pay, and we also need to ensure that we have, in terms of the public, you know, the services as well, because it will be concerning going forward in the next wee while. So, does members want to add anything to that?
Just to ask Chair urgently from Northern Ireland Water what contingency plans they have to continue operating on those days that are impacted by strike action. Clearly, like yourself, we want to see everyone getting fair pay, but this is critical infrastructure for Northern Ireland, and public health is an issue here as well. So we need to get assurances how they will operate and what plans they have in the background to ensure at least the minimum level of legal standards being maintained.
Yeah.
Chair, did anybody see the Spotlight documentary? Because the minimum level is barely being met. Like Northern Ireland Water is hugely struggling at the minute, and this is just heaping more pressure on them. Like the bare minimum is barely being met.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've known that for quite some time
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And I mean, in this committee, we've heard the range of evidence in relation to it. You know, it's concerning. And this may sound sad to say this, but it is something that's keeping me awake at night, because this is critical infrastructure, and there will be a public health risk in relation to it. So it will impact across Northern Ireland in a huge way. Anybody want to add anything else?
Just to suppose to reiterate the point you'd made, Chair, in support of the workers' right to strike, the right to fair pay. And going back to the earlier conversation where Northern Ireland Water are saying, oh, NIA are making us do more, the bare minimum has increased and the capacity to do it has decreased, it seems. So I think puts even more in focus the importance of those engagements we have coming up with both those agencies. But just again, if we write urgently to the Minister and the Department, seeing how they're trying to address this pay issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sure, it's not a decision that's been taken lightly by the... No.
It would be good to try and get that information, you know, for next week's committee, given, you know, we're talking here about the 10th and the 16th of December. Look, I suppose, apologies, I should have declared an interest just in relation to that, because I do have family members that work within NI Water, so I'll just put that on the record now. Apologies about that. So I'm asking members if they have any other business that they wish to raise at this moment in time. Okay, thank you, members. Date, time and location of the next meeting. Believe it or not, next week will be our last meeting of 2024. So the meeting will take place at 10 a.m. on the 11th of December in room 29, Parliament Buildings at 10 a.m. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. I now adjourn the meeting.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.